Hey everyone, just giving a couple of minutes for a few more people to join. But welcome to our Digital Disruption in Supply Chain webinar. My name is Nathan Warner. I'm a director here at And Digital, and I'm going to be your host for this exciting panel event today. At And Digital, we provide bespoke software development using modern technology and practices, and we specialize in guide, building, and equipping our clients to accelerate their digital transformation. But today is not about And Digital, it's about the great insights we're going to hear from this panel on digital supply chain. Organizations have never been challenged as much as they are today. Disruption in supply chain has happened across the board, impacting availability, lead time, and cost at the same time as consumer behavior changing. And this continues to change and affecting both the business channel strategy on both online and offline. What we're going to hear today is from leading experts in this field, which I'm really excited about, who are experienced in driving change across a range of industries, including fashion, consumer products, and others. And they're going to share some of the insights that they've picked up and seen along the way. We're going to go through an informal Q&A with our panel. Just a little bit of housekeeping first. This is a webinar, so everyone who has joined the panel is on mute. So you're automatically on mute. You haven't got an option to turn on your camera, so don't worry. That's just to avoid disturbance, but you'll be able to hopefully see and hear us. If you have any questions or comments as we go through the discussion, there is a Q&A button at the bottom. Please click on it. It allows you to submit the comment and question, or if you see a question that you really agree with and you want to get answered first, you can upvote that question. We will answer those questions at the end after a bit of an informal discussion, as I said, and hopefully we'll get through all of them at the end of the talk. If we don't get to all of them, don't worry, we'll make sure that we follow up and on those if you are interested and still want a response against them. This event is recorded and it will be shared with you post the event alongside the presentations and further reading suggestions in the post-event communication. When you are posting questions, just a final point and comments, if you want to remain anonymous, just select please send anonymous. If you want to, please include your company and name. It helps us address the question specifically. So without further ado, let's get stuck in. So let's get to the introductions. Firstly, apologies, Sean Pierce, our CTO at Augusta, has fallen unwell, so he's not going to be with us today, but we still have a really exciting panel, and I'm going to go to the first introduction with yourself, Koray.
Hello, everyone. I've been in the retail industry for more than 25 years, both on the supply side and the retail side, and I had the privilege to work from big supermarket chains to the small startups. And recently, I've been running on my own consultancy business, helping different retailers and suppliers.
Thanks, Koray. Over to you, Chris.
Hi, everyone. I'm Chris Conroy. I work for the Lego Group as head of product for supply chain, where I'm responsible for creating and delivering the overall digital strategy for various supply chain functions, including procurement, omnichannel, demand planning, warehouse and fulfillment, supply network planning. Prior to joining earlier this year, I worked in the life sciences and fast-moving consumer healthcare industry, where most recently I led a team of product managers delivering digital products and services to GlaxoSmithKline's global supply chain.
Thanks, Chris. And Rachel?
Thanks, Nathan. My name's Rachel. I'm a managing consultant for digital supply chain at And Digital, where I've been for the last 3 years. And prior to that, my background is in grocery online fulfillment.
Thank you. So let's dive straight into our first question. And Koray, I'll come to you first on this one, and then we'll move around. So first question is, what are the biggest challenges in scaling and running an effective supply chain from your experience?
For me, I think the biggest thing at the moment, very nowadays problem is the uncertainty. Every side of the supply chain, from cost to forecast to demand, everything is changing. And when you have this much uncertainty and the whole supply chain is geared up by backwards looking, which is not helping, full of blind spots, so you don't know where your stock is exactly, And in general, all the costings are based on averages of averages. So you don't go to the granular level. That creates a big problem to manage all this uncertainty.
Yeah, really interesting points there. I suppose from your experience, Chris, anything to build on that?
I think we're all aware of the changes that have happened over the past couple of years, and really the focus that's put on supply chain and its contribution to the success of enterprises and companies. I think those challenges really are also translating into a demand for new skill sets. So we're really looking for capabilities that have a deeper affinity with digital tools, more fluency with managing broader and richer data sets, and a really deep understanding of the role that supply chain has. I think those demands were already evolving, but they've really accelerated. And now getting access to those skills and capabilities has become a real competition across companies. So I think for me, one of the challenges right now is actually getting people who can really work in that context, who understand it, and who are ready to solve some of the problems that we have now that we might not have had in the past.
Yeah, it's a really interesting point around how that capabilities and model has changed with the tech, and that's rapidly, and often that can lag and be one of the challenges missed. Rachel, from your experience in advising across industries and organizations, are you seeing the same things?
Yeah, and I think it builds on Chris's point. It's you have to kind of understand the dependencies in the value chain and how it all connects. And if you have an error or something that happens in one node, how that impacts the rest of the nodes. And it's building that knowledge in your teams to understand that whilst it's also changing. And understanding the knock-on effects of those changes. So, the pandemic was a great example of having, multiple knock-on effects, and who in the business could you refer to that had a full understanding of, the full value chain and the kind of tightly coupled nodes. And yeah, adapting to that from a technical perspective, let alone a physical perspective, has been a real challenge, and continues to be. Right, there's still lots of things that are changing and moving parts, and I think companies are trying to figure out how to respond and how to be adaptable.
Yeah, and we've touched a little bit on in all of your responses there on some of the capabilities changing. I mean, what would you say now are the most important and relevant supply chain capabilities that companies need to build to stay relevant in today's market? I'll go first to you, Chris, and then Koray.
Yeah, it's a really interesting question, right? And I'm not sure there's kind of a single answer to this. I think every industry has its own specific challenges that are unique to them, and how supply chain needs to face up to them right now. I think even companies within industries have got their own specific needs. So what I would say is that really understanding the focus of the business and where supply chain can really make a difference to the overall success of the company, the connection with the person, the business partner, or the consumer that's the end of the supply chain. That's something that's like really critical right now. I think supply chain perhaps was always seen as a bit of a cost center. I think increasingly, it plays such an important role in how we operate organizations. So if I think about my experiences in life sciences, the regulatory challenges that were driving a lot of the supply chain considerations there don't exist in the same way for the Lego Group, where actually facing out to the consumer and understanding how we sort of drive those differentiated experiences across our different channels and product segments, that's really driving a different need on the supply chain. I mean, of course, like there are core capabilities that are still at the heart of everything we do. So the ability to plan, source, make, deliver, and return products are fundamental. But the ability to orchestrate those in the context of a business operating model, I think, is something that's even more relevant now than it has been.
Yeah, absolutely. That's really interesting points there, in particular the orchestration point that you said about how you connect those together. And I think, Koray, you mentioned data before. So same question to you around capabilities in supply chain. What are you seeing companies are needing to build to stay relevant?
for me, in one word, is all about agility at the moment. And to be able to have that agility, you have to have the access to the real-time information. And I want to underline the information there, not the data, because each companies within the supply chain or players can have a lot of data within their silos. And that comes back to the Chris's orchestration point. In order to be able to orchestrate that one, you should be able to access the real-time information. And that needs a lot of data exchange between different players within the whole supply chain. For me, the success is to have the single view of the customer and the single view of the stock anytime, every time. So, and we see all the time in different companies that I consult with, owning the data is just the beginning of the journey. Can you make sure that you can turn that data, exchanging it in the right way to turn it into information? So then you can make some actionable decisions out of it.
Yeah, thank you. And Rachel, building on that, what have you been seeing?
Yeah, and I guess there's two words that really just stood out to me in those responses of orchestration and agility. What I've been seeing with companies is them kind of grappling with how to adapt their network strategy. So rather than having everything everywhere and available next day, etc., what actually should be the market proposition, and how do you disseminate that information to the rest of your teams, and then create the technical architecture and infrastructure beneath that to create that supply chain capability that is both physical as well as technical, in a way that you can keep adapting. Things are not going to stand still, they will keep changing. Things are changing now, and obviously we've seen a huge rate of change over the last couple of years. And so the capabilities that people need is not right. Let's find our next fixed state and hope that that's it for the next 5 years. And, we've done our transformation and tick in the box, right? It's how do you keep kind of adapting and create the kind of modularity beneath that to continue flexing with the market.
We touched a little bit on this already within those points, but then I think when we now insert the word digital, I suppose, and what that means to everyone. How do you think digital or modern technology, tools, processes, and techniques have disrupted supply chain thinking for you? I'll come, Chris, to you first.
It's a great question. There's so many ways to answer this. How long have you got? So I think if I kind of reflect on my own experiences over the past 5 years or so, I think there's just been some tremendous examples where new technologies and capabilities have started to really drive innovative use cases. I mentioned earlier on, the serialization requirements for life sciences. Across the farm industry, the ability to have that traceability and confidence that the products that we were sourcing and dispensing were authentic and correct all the way through the supply chain was a real game changer. But it also required the industry to work together to put in place new technologies to actually connect that together, and it then introduced the data that we were able to then apply for different use cases to generate more insight and information. And I just don't think that would have been possible 10, 15 years ago in the way that we're working now. Similarly, we've seen this huge growth in companies offering digital services, either through software as a service or with existing supply chain partnership companies, providing business process as a service and scaling their own digital offerings, and moving away from this classic sort of point-to-point integration paradigm to these more networks of business groups connecting different processes or industries. So where we might once have had to build internal solutions to expose business processes, now we can actually go out to these marketplaces and integrate them much more effectively, which talks to the point that Karai was making earlier on. We now have access to so much data both within the enterprise and across enterprises. Being able to bring that together is one challenge, right? Being able to bring it together in a timely manner, making sure we've got the right architecture and capabilities to access it and bring it together. But then what do we do with it? That's the real other challenge, and actually thinking about how we can use that data that we just didn't have access to before in new and innovative ways to drive use cases for customers internally, but also for our external customers. I think that's where we're really seeing the disruptive thinking. And again, it comes back to this idea, do we have the right capabilities? Do we have the right thinking to tackle those problems in new and interesting ways? Because the world really has changed tremendously over the past 5 years, and we have so much more accessibility and data and timeliness of data to work to create those insights now.
Yeah, I think, I suppose, and Karai, from your perspective, ex-COO, and kind of coming more from the kind of supply chain operations side, how have you seen digital and technology disrupt and change that thinking?
Now, if you take the fashion industry, it has disrupted every single step of the whole process, even to the point of creating demand, never mind anything, because all of a sudden you have all those social media channels from Instagram to TikTok. While you went in there with different intentions, all of a sudden with new ads or new videos, you decide that you needed a new dress or new shirt that you see. So even if you didn't have that demand in your mind, you were bombarded with the digital to create the demand. Then before you would only think about the stores that are near you. Now within your fingertips, you have millions of SKUs you can reach to, and you would expect it to be delivered within days, if not just within hours. And while you are waiting to be delivered, you want to see the full visibility in each step where the product is, and to be able to change your mind last minute. Don't bring it to my home, bring it to my office, or drop it, and so on. So it has absolutely, the digital thinking and digital capabilities absolutely changed the whole game there. Now we can see that penetration in more on the what I call the real supply channel backwards, because most of the suppliers will be blind when the goods are on the sea, custom clearance, delivering to their DC, and so on. Now the silos are being broken and the data exchanges have started. Now you have the full visibility. So then, because you have the full visibility and to the minute detail, even if you don't have the product, you can let suppliers reserve from the incoming product. So all of a sudden, your offering is not the goods that you have in your warehouse or on your shelf, even the things that are on the way to you, you can turn it into the sales, or share that information with the suppliers that you have, and interacting quickly with the increasing demand, because the demand is generated very quickly, but lost very quickly also.
I think that comes to your agility point, doesn't it, Karai? The fact is, it's really allowed you to respond quicker, but that's given a whole host of opportunities, but a whole host of pressures on people who run the supply chain to step into that. And it's Rachel, from your perspective, what you've seen, anything to add there?
Yeah, I would say back to, I guess, like Chris's point on the data, I think it's one opportunity having lots of data, but it can also then present a bit of a headache of, how do you use that data? What are you allowed to do with that data as that's changed, obviously in the last, 5 years of what you can do with that data. And then kind of to Koray's point of having this, different set of customers coming through online. How do you segment those customers? Are you going to treat them all the same? You probably shouldn't. There are segments within that demand that need, treating differently, and yet creating a single digital strategy for that channel. So those are kind of some of the complexities that I think organizations are trying to work through, even though digital is a great opportunity. I'd say the other thing that I've seen change over the last decade, I guess, is having more modularity and flexibility with those kind of upstream connections and the downstream connections, so that you can, chop and change things, which I think helps. So for example, if you run a tender and you can change your 3PL downstream, or you can change whoever's doing kind of the delivery and dispatch, I think that keeps things competitive in the market, as long as you can kind of keep things modular and flexible to retain that competitiveness. So I think that's been a bit of a game changer compared to perhaps how things used to be historically, of you just kind of sign a contract for forevermore, and that doesn't really adapt to your needs and your strategy.
Yeah, interesting. I suppose we've taking that to the next layer now. We've talked about capabilities of the organization. We've talked about what digital is doing at a technology layer. Ultimately, this does come back down to people and the people who are running it. Be really interested in hearing from you, Koray, about the skills and people that you're building when you're building teams now to address these new challenges. How has that changed, or what skills are you looking for?
Yeah, as Chris mentioned it before, the needs of the people and the capabilities that they have, and to be really has changed, and they have to be really comfortable, first of all, in a data-rich world, and then have a very good idea of what data is important to make which decisions, and in which way the data should be shared, and as I said before, turned into information. So that, and within the IT architecture, that helps that data interchange between so the way I see now within the supply chain people, definitely they have to be data savvy, but also should be able to sit down with a IT developer to be able to explain their business needs, so the correct and right developments are being made. And lastly, the leader should be able to build up the cases to be able to take it to the boards to get that capital needed. Because without that investment, or without building that case, we'll be only talking about these things, but you won't be able to put it in action.
Yeah, you're right. So not only being able to build that information and skills down, but also present that up to the board to show them the opportunities that presents. So I suppose, Chris, building into your what you've seen across GSK and Lego, what are the skills that are most important now in building teams?
Yeah, and I think if I sort of focus in a little bit on sort of what we need in a product management space, right? So how do we sort of navigate our way through that digital journey? I've always really thought about product managers as having three kind of main areas of capability. And I think this applies kind of broadly, whichever industry or function you support, but really having a deep understanding of the business domain that our products operate in, a real affinity with the customer of those products internally, but also an understanding of kind of the external trends in that business area and business domain. I think that's kind of like table stakes, right? You need to understand that. Secondly, how does technology map into that domain? So people who have a great view of how digital technologies have solved specific problems associated with those business challenges, both common problems that have already been solved, but also the emerging challenges and how technology is starting to address some of those use cases as well. I think that's the kind of second pillar that I sort of look for. And then the third one, right, is just great product management capabilities. So people who are, have that natural entrepreneurship, the desire to surface and solve problems, the ability to express the value that brings to companies, and the skills to balance those ideas off with the work required to deliver those capabilities in context, which talks to Karai's point around being able to translate that into kind of an engineering worldview as well. For me, those are the kind of skill sets that I think we really look for to help to move forward and solve some of the problems that we might not have seen before.
Yeah, and Rachel?
Yeah, I think mine would echo kind of Chris, but I'm a firm advocate for being the customer to understand the customer. So unless you kind of buy things yourself and go on that journey, do you really understand, you know, actually what the customer is seeing and feeling and experiencing? And if there is an issue that you identify from your journey, do you understand fully the kind of the supply chain, the value chain behind that, and how to kind of troubleshoot that? So I think in terms of skill set, it's having enough knowledge of how the business works end to end to be able to understand existing capabilities, to know then actually what can you do, what role can you play in improving those capabilities.
Yeah, very good. And I'm going to come to the last question now, before I go to the open Q&A. Just a reminder, in case anyone joined late, if you would like to submit a question that I can post to the panel, there's a Q&A button at the bottom and you can add a question there. We've got 3 questions there at the moment, so please feel free to add a question or comment as we complete this last question. So the final one is, what would be your top tip for people beginning their digital supply chain strategy? I will come first to you, Chris.
Can I give 3? Is that okay?
Okay, that's fine.
So I think, again, just thinking about kind of where we are with solving problems and applying digital technologies, I think one of the most important things is to find the right way to map out the different customers that you have within the organization and outside the organization, and the unique outcomes that they're looking for to do their job effectively and efficiently. So really just thinking about how we can bring those viewpoints together and how we organize the teams that need to work with those customers, how that's connected into the business strategy and where we invest time in delivering digital solutions. So understanding that context is super important. And I think also to understand then where you are on that digitization journey, and to be honest as well, and kind of really accept that it takes time and not everything's going to be right the first time, and get that understood across the organization as well. We talk a lot about technology, but we've also got to acknowledge that it's as much about people and the change that technology is bringing as well. So everybody has to be comfortable with that, and it's right across the business. And then finally, I think also just get comfortable with the idea that there isn't a one-size-fits-all approach to this. And something that works for one customer group might not work for another. Even when that approach is bringing in new solutions, it's likely to be different as the products move through different stages of maturity as well. So we have to be adapting and evolving all the time, as Rachel said earlier. And I think we just have to get used to this idea that change and evolution is now just a part of how we do things.
Yeah, right back to some of the points you said at the beginning, really interesting. Karai, what's your top tip?
Okay, my top tip, I would say, will be like concentrate on the 3 A's. Let me explain you. The first A is assessment. Start with the assessment of the current supply chain. And as Chris says, never a big bang, so it will be incremental, small steps. So you really have to understand. Simple SWOT analysis will be a great place to start to agree on actionable goals for the specific problems that you are facing. The second A is alignment. So you have to make sure all the business and the supply partners are aligned on what is the problem that you are going to resolve by moving into digitalization. What are the expected benefits? To make sure as everybody is on the same page on that one. The last one is analyze, which means when you have that step digitally put into the supply chain, make sure what you expected to get as benefit is delivered. if not fine tune it, because that will be the step that will help you to build on your second step and ask for bigger investments and make the whole supply chain digital. As you can see, the execution of the thing itself is a minor thing. I think people make that mistake and jump into that one rather than doing the assessment, alignment, and once it's analyzed.
Yeah, in particular, I mean, because you're talking most of, well, both the businesses that you work with, all of them have got significant volumes going through, right? So if you've got to make sure you understand the benefits before you move. So I absolutely understand that point. Rachel, final point, top tips.
Yeah, I'm glad we're going with tips now, because as the other two went with more than one, so I'm going for two as well. So the first one I think has already been said, but I'll just kind of rephrase, I guess, is moving away from this kind of transformation mindset that it's a one fixed job, and once it's done, and we can tick and move on. I think there are, of course, still monolithic applications and legacy setups that we're trying to perhaps move away from and create that agility. But I think we need to kind of shift our mindset to be that we are going to continue adapting and evolving, because markets, customers, environmental pressures will keep adapting and evolving, and we have to just keep adapting and evolving with that to stay relevant. So that would be the first part, that it's not just like a one job that's going to be done in 3 years and it will pay back within 5 years. And my second point would just be kind of the organizational structure that's needed to support that, to understand the existing kind of network today, draw on knowledge today from what's already known within a company, and the ability to kind of share that with people that join, and kind of disseminate across the business what the objectives are, what is it you want to achieve in capabilities in the next 3 years, and make sure that that is known and understood by teams that ultimately create the technical capabilities to achieve those objectives. So having the right organizational structure and setup cannot be kind of underestimated for organizations achieving their objectives. Yeah,
really interesting, I think, and thank you again for all of your insights and answers to today's question. It's absolutely fascinating to see, I guess, the range of issues all of you brought to the table, but the commonalities as well across all of the industries and experience you have around the pace of change, the need for agility, the understanding of data, the orchestration. And there were some great examples there that I think we can all relate to and bring into our work that we're looking at the moment. I'm going to move to the informal Q&A now. So all of our attendees, there is still time to ask a couple of questions. We've got 4 in there at the moment. As I said, I'm not going to ask all of the panelists actually to respond to every question so that we get out of here on time. But I will try and steer to each one of you who I think may be best qualified to ask. But if any of you have an additional answer you want to add in, please add those thoughts in. So I'm going to go for the first question, which came from Joe Ridge Ross. And just because, Koray, you brought in TikTok into the conversation, the question is, does agility to meet new media demands suggest companies need to replace certain leadership positions to younger qualified professionals?
Is it for me, Nate?
That's for you, Koray, because, well, you brought it as an avid TikTok user yourself. I thought maybe you could answer that.
I think it's 2 things for me. First of all, I wouldn't use the word replace. I would use maybe addition. There will be new roles added to the decision making. Secondly, it is not about being young and old. It's more about being open to learning and open to new things or not. Because you can be very young, but very close to those kind of things, or vice versa, or you are willing to learn. And it's very, very important that those 2 things are combined with the experience and the new changes coming together to make the right decision.
Yeah, fundamentally agree with that question. Let's go to another one. So we've talked a lot about data, and we've also talked about how supply chain is informing that. Could you give an example about how data is being used to inform that customer proposition development? And Chris, I'm going to pick on you just because Karai answered the last one.
Yeah, we have talked quite a bit about data already today, haven't we? And I think, you know, we can all come up with examples where we're using data in a new and innovative way to drive supply chain, whether it's through that real-time visibility. I got an example from, you know, again from GSK, where we were starting to do real-time temperature monitoring of products and alert for temperature excursions or other environmental excursions on you know, long shipments, which is, you know, tremendously exciting when you've got a product that might take 3 months to get from one part of the world to the other, and you can identify if it's gone out of tolerance halfway around the world. But I think that the context of kind of using data to drive specific use cases in supply chain is one. I think the other thing that it's worth reflecting on a little bit is the data that we're able to sense and monitor and record in the usage of our products as well, the digital products that we're building. Which again, I think as we kind of move away from that sort of monolithic, you know, maybe kind of more vendor-led, ERP-led world, where that data just wasn't really accessible, being able to kind of build that sensing into the products now to understand how people are using the tools that we're building, what parts of the tools they're actually using and which ones they aren't, how we can drive more usability and how we can drive more efficiency into those products to give them a better customer experience overall. I think it's something that applies right across the board, and increasingly, you know, looking at some of our internal customers as well, who just haven't had that much focus on the products that they've been gifted to use. You don't really have much optionality. If you're a shop floor scheduler, you've got one way of accessing the scheduling tool. You're used to being given the product that you get, and now we're able to actually kind of build some of those capabilities in and maybe make their lives a bit easier through drawing that data for user research. Yeah,
no, fascinating. And I know, Karai, you already shared some examples in fast fashion, how it's informing the supply chain product selection. Maybe Rachel, quickly, from a kind of meal plan, and I know Sean's not here from Gusto, but that experience, have you seen data informing customer proposition at that side?
Yeah, I think so. I think, you know, in any industry, it's difficult to make everything everywhere, you know, happen and achievable within kind of cost constraints and lead time pressures, as well as any green credentials. So I think, you know, increasingly data is being used to fine tune what's available where and when. So if you think about actually, you know, if I want a meal tomorrow, should I have a choice of, you know, 80 meals, or actually, you know, is there a portion of that that's more relevant for me and my behavior in what I want next day? And I think that works across probably other industries as well, of, you know, what actually is your different demands and different customer profiles within that data, and how can you fine tune your offering across channels to respond to the customers and create those propositions that are really relevant. Because yeah, it's just too costly to try and get everything everywhere to you know, make every customer happy.
Yeah.
Nathan, if I can just add on this one, just a quick one. Sometimes I just want to be clear. Sometimes when we talk about data, everybody thinks about very complicated and, you know, something that you cannot really action. But like every apparel retailer now, within their weekly trading pack, now have a page of most search items in their websites. Here is it, that the customers are saying they want to buy this item in your website. So they already visited you and they are looking for it. That's a very, very, very valuable data, which we didn't have 5-10 years ago. They are literally asking what they are looking.
Yeah. And just to build on that, I guess what I see sometimes from clients is them building trust and confidence in that data. There isn't always trust and confidence in the data that they have, and whether it's actually giving them a reliable and informed view of their market, of their customers.
Good. I think I'll move on to another question now from Eunice here. he shared so many amazing solutions in the world for various issues to solve. We've touched a little bit about how moving away from Model X and introducing digital technology means actually the partnering landscape has changed. Eunice's question is, how can the creators of those solutions reach the decision makers, and should companies have a door or channel for innovation providers to show what is available to contribute? Or how have you seen that work, where you're trying to connect into a new ecosystem of technologies and the challenges that brings? Chris, I'll go to you first.
It's a really good question. And I think different companies are starting to address this and to tackle it in different ways. I've worked with companies and I've seen companies who recognize the need to have specific innovation teams and departments embedded within the organization who can act as that point of outreach and intake for new and exciting ideas and opportunities and technologies that are maybe very early on the hype cycle, or which are kind of reaching that point of maturity, and to provide them with that sort of incubation space to test and learn in a safe environment within a broader enterprise. So I think we are seeing that trend and that acknowledgement that it's not just a single vendor or a small number of solution offerings that really need to come together to solve problems. And I think as well, the shift to that more digital mindset and the more product-led thinking complements that very well. So, having roles across the organization who are thinking about the most important problems to solve, and then going and running the research and discovery to think about how we can solve those problems in a more unconstrained way than perhaps we might have done traditionally. I think both of those methods and philosophies, if you like, really help us to make the connection between those new innovative solutions and the problems that we have within companies.
Yeah, good. Anything to add, Rachel or Koray, or happy with Chris's response?
I'd add that I guess the beauty of my role is that often you see a problem that's been solved, which actually another company can learn from. As in, there aren't many unique problems out there that one business is facing alone. Actually, there are, similar problems. I'm not going to say that they're the same. There's similar problems that organizations are tackling, and therefore there are kind of tried and tested approaches for overcoming those problems. So that's one. And two, I build on Chris's point about test and learn. I think, more and more smaller digital organizations are creating kind of proofs of concept where you can actually try something, rather than having, a big, I won't call out any names, but a big vendor that claims to solve all of your problems in one size fits all kind of solution.
Thank you, Rachel. I'll go and move on to another question we've got here now from Roger and Koray. I'll come to you for this one, which is, we've talked a lot about data, we said, and we've talked about accessibility. That Roger's question is, that timeliness and availability of data, how has that changed the way you operate? So having more data on demand, how has that changed what you do?
Again, it changes, especially from the apparel world that I work a lot in. Change from the whole product development, what to offer, to the SKU numbers, to the order of size. Now, because the demand is changing so rapidly, and the information that is so much accessible, what is in fashion, or the influencers to be able to influence that fashion thing and create that demand instantly, that you have to adapt and to be able to, and all fast fashion, which is now, for me, fast fashion was Zara's and H&M's. Now what we have is ultra fast fashion with the, Boohoo's of this world, Asos of this world. Is just like a celebrity wears something, how quickly you can have that product for your customers. And we are talking about days, literally days here, not weeks, not months. So, as I said, everything starts for me from the customer. So if the demand is created, you adapt yourself to that one. And you have to have that digital capability in order to be able to, like, the Instagram picture becomes your design pack. You do the digital fitting now. You don't have to fit the garments on mannequins, digitally cut, shipped. And while they do the first shipment, you do the digital photography, put it on your website, and it is on while it is coming to you. And then you understand the demand by how many people are clicking to go, even before you finish your stock, to give the repeat order or not.
Yeah, I mean, as you said, it's so pervasive, such a broad question to answer. But as you said, the pace and adaptability is just, fundamentally changed across the board, hasn't it? I mean, fashion is an extreme example, but it's similar across other industries too. Chris, I'm going to come to you for a question now about product and product culture from John at Gusto. What do you view as the largest challenges to adopting a product culture within supply chain function, where mechanisms such as experimentation, more commonly adopted in consumer-facing digital products, may not be widely understood?
It's another great question. There's so many different ways to answer this. So a couple of things, a couple of immediate reflections. I think, first of all, I wouldn't isolate supply chain as having a challenge in adopting a product culture. I think larger companies, bigger enterprises who maybe have to deal with the physical manufacturing and movement of products, or perhaps have got more of a challenge in this space. But I think all companies, if they're moving from one paradigm to the other, have got to really think very carefully what that cultural change looks like for them and how to go about doing it in a way that really encompasses the whole organization, from the C-suite right down, and actually how to effectively run the change management across all levels, where the sponsorship is coming from, where the energy is put behind it, and actually how the transformation of the organization can support that as well. So there's books and books written on how to do that effectively, and I think that's not necessarily unique to supply chain. What is, I think, unique to manufacturing and supply chain is perhaps we've come from a world where much of the kind of ERP and monolithic systems that we put in place have kind of landed in this area in the past. And I think there's a legacy of customers of IT who've perhaps heard the promise that when we're finished this, we're not going to just leave it and walk away. We're going to come back and we're going to continue to invest and we're going to continue to evolve. And of course, priorities change and people change. And so what gets put in may not evolve, and it may not continue to adapt, and it may not continue to delight the users of that product. And so when we come along with a story that says, don't worry, what we're going to do is put in the bare minimum. We're going to put in a minimum viable product, and then we're going to continue to grow it out. You can understand why there's some skepticism around the organization that what's going to be different this time. So what do we need to do differently? I think we have to walk the walk, and we have to build trust by just demonstrating that this way of doing things actually builds out and continues to evolve and continues to deliver value. And I think it's only through demonstrating that we're able to do this and bring value that we gain that trust and we really start to change those hearts and minds.
I think that builds to your point before, Chris, that recognition that this doesn't happen overnight. This is something that's here to stay and takes time to get right. And I agree. The proof is in the pudding when you start to see the results and the continual value delivered. Hopefully a quicker question. I'm going to come to you, Koray, from Amit. With data easily available, do you see the season pattern, spring, summer, autumn, winter in fashion changing and adapting more to the demands of the market? So,
yes, it has changed totally. And even, with the COVID, we've seen even being stuck in the house versus going out. Everything is changing all the time.
Yeah. As you said, it's changed in terms of the direction. That's no longer the strategy around where companies should be meeting their supply chain. Okay, good. One more question then from Eunice, which is about countries, I suppose, that we're sourcing from. So Based on the supply of various products, should companies be looking at a wider range of countries and not only China as a main source of products? Come back to you on that one as well, Koray.
Yeah, and a lot of companies had to do it because of the lockdowns. So a lot of retailers were, forced to use China because of the product ranges or the cost and so on. But because of China's approach to the COVID was so severe, they had to move out. And now understand the first cost price of a product is not the all means. Sometimes you might pay a bit more, but because you're reacting to the market trends much more quicker and you have less markdown, guess what? You will end up with a better margin.
Yeah, no longer fixed to those countries. As you said, it has changed already. So 2 questions left. I'm going to try and get through both. I'm going to come to you, Chris, for one, and Rachel for the last one. Chris, how do you see the specific roles changing within supply chain as digital supply chain develops, i.e. demand planners becoming obsolete and this role becoming more of an analyst role?
I think it's a good question, and it maybe ties in a little bit with the other question as well, right? So where do we see the future of digital technology support and supply chain? I think generally, most people would acknowledge that looking to have the model operate more effectively and efficiently, and to actually be able to generate decisions that are resolved within the model itself, within the planning systems, is where we're anticipating that it goes. So more and more closed loop decision making within the system, I think is kind of where I'm expecting it to go over the next 5 years. What does that mean for roles of people who traditionally kind of make those decisions? I think those roles need to evolve. I don't think they become obsolete, but rather than doing demand planning and exception management, the role of somebody to orchestrate demand needs to be more about how you codify that system and how you apply the business logic and the business rules in the context of that overall planning system, so that the decisions that the model is making for you are appropriate to the business. So I think it's an evolution of where we come. And let's face it, right? I mean, supply chain planning has always been about modeling and heuristics and analytics. This for me is just moving up that value chain and introducing a new level of sophistication and capability.
Yeah, thanks, and completely agree. And so the final question, I suppose, and Rachel, I'll come to you, but welcome any other thoughts from you, Koray or Chris. And it's, what do you see happening within the supply chain space, traditional and digital, in the next 5 years? I know it's broad, but see if you can answer that in one minute.
Yeah, I think at least in the next couple of years, there's obviously going to be quite a bit of price sensitivity. So how do organizations respond to that? Have they got kind of data that they can use to maintain customer loyalty and offer the shopper or the customer the best proposition? I think that will be kind of the key perhaps to winning in the next couple of years, because I think there's still a bit of a storm to weather. So how do you maintain their loyalty? I think that's going to be key. How do you make sure that they come back to you and not your kind of competitors?
Yeah, good. Any final points, Koray or Chris, from you?
Yeah, for me, really the response time of the supply chains will make or break the retailers going forward. Before, having the product was the main differentiator, but now that has totally changed when you think about the platform strategies. Now you go to the next site, you can buy more than 500 different brands from a next site. So it's not about the product, it is who is responding. So for me, very, very simple, for the next 5 years, supply chain will be the differentiator between the winners and the losers.
Yeah, okay. And Chris, any point?
I mean, I talked earlier on about the technology aspect. I think, we're seeing some fairly macro shifts in the way that supply chain needs to operate because of the volatility and the disruptions that we've had. So I think more modular supply chains that are more agile and nimble, while still balancing, the cost of running them, I think that's going to really drive a very different way of doing business. And again, the digital products that sit behind that need to be able to respond to that and to be modular and flexible to allow us to plug and play different services across the supply chains as we go forward.
Thank you. Thank you all, firstly to all the panelists here, but also the organising team for this, what was a great webinar. Thank you for everyone who's listened and spending your time with us. Recording and further reading suggestions will be made available after the session in the follow-up post-event. But if you have any immediate questions or follow-up, please feel free to connect on LinkedIn or follow up and contact us directly. Thank you for your time again, and thank you all. It was a pleasure hosting this event.